So division in the early years. Do we do division? Yeah, kind of. Yeah, so we tend to use the word sharing. We don't say divide or anything like that. They've got plenty of time throughout their schooling to learn about division in that sense. But obviously sharing to children at that age, they might be thinking, oh, you're not fair, you're not sharing like generally in a classroom. But no, we try and also use grouping as well, so they know it's the maths type of sharing. So we like to make this very practical with them. For example, if we're pretending to have like a picnic, and we've got some cupcakes, and how can we be fair? How can we share? So we go, one for you, one for you, one for you, one for you. So they've obviously got the same amount. So obviously it's exactly the same with the Numicon and the multi-link cubes. So with the Numicon I've got 4 here, but we need to obviously split it up. So I get 4 ones, and then obviously I go for 1 for you and 1 for you, and then so on. They've really stuck on these ones, and exactly the same here as well. But obviously we can see it's very early stages, but actually they quite enjoy sharing out things, especially if it's to do with food or sweets or something like that. But it does get them started with division.
Division in year 1, introduced as grouping, as Chris mentioned the word grouping there. So we have the number 8, for example, and this is the concrete, and we want to share it between perhaps 2 people, 2 groups. Again, 1 here, 1 here, 1 for you, 1 for you. So that idea of sharing and making sure that the groups are equal. Moving on then to pictorial, the number 8, and then the children can draw the correct number in each section so that the groups are again equal. Abstract, then the symbol 8 divided by 2 equals 4. So moving from the concrete to the pictorial to the abstract, with the concrete resources to be able to share, so that they get the idea that dividing, you are sharing, you're putting things into groups. We also, it was mentioned earlier, and I didn't mention it, I should have, just with the talking about multiplication, just so that you see examples of arrays, so that the children see, and they will be able to draw their own arrays. So this arrays would start to be introduced towards the end of year 1, leading on to year 2 using them. So the language, you can see the language as the children are getting older leads on to the language that they would use, the vocabulary that they would be using in year 2. And they're just a couple of examples, but the children would draw their own, and we talk about how many rows are there, and they would be able to very quickly see that that's 4 times 3. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So and built upon each year, so that again in year 3 they would use arrays, and not stopping at year 3, indeed moving on up to school, so they can look and see, well, I can just tell what number that is. So that would really be division in year.
Division in year 2, similar to multiplication, we deal with 2s, 5s and 10s, but like Ms Galvin said, you'll come across others. So if we're doing 5 times 3, you'll start thinking about the 3s as well. With the concrete, they'll physically have the cubes or the counters, and they'll physically share them out. So if we were doing 8 divided by 2, they'd do 8, shared equally into 2 groups, and they'll share it 1 at a time, and then realise they've got 4 in each group. And then moving on to pictorial, they will draw the groups themselves, and as opposed to using cubes, they would draw the crosses instead. Sometimes they like to draw dots, but it can be a bit confusing if they maybe draw 1 dot and then they've accidentally hit the book and then they count another 3, which has happened lots of times. So if they draw their crosses, it's just a lot clearer for them, and they're less likely to get confused or make a mistake. Another way of doing it, using a pictorial way, we use bar models. So if they had 8 as their whole number at the top, they're going to share it equally into 2 groups, so 2 parts, and they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I've got 4 in 1 part, and they're equal parts. And then moving on to the abstract, they know that 8 divided by 2 would equal 4, and then it's also realising that if they know 8 divided by 2 equals 4, they understand that 8 divided by 4 equals 2. But yeah, that would be the same for 5s and 10s.
Okay, so division in year 3, works on whole numbers with no remainders, and we introduce remainders. So the children are very familiar with their concrete apparatus. So 53 divided by 4. So we set out our 4 spaces so we know that we are sharing equally. Sharing equally and remainders are all useful. So 10, 20, 30, 40. Oh, I've got one that I can't share. So we then have to use the next piece of vocabulary with the children, which is to exchange. So we get our 10 ones and swap them for our 110. We then have all 13 counters together, which we can then share out. And again, the children will very quickly be able to share them and see them. But whilst we're doing this, we're also talking to the children about what do they remember about their times tables. Oh, 3 times 4 is 12. That leaves me with 1 left over. We can't just leave 1 left over. How do we record that? Well, we use the word remainder and we use the R to show that. So we write our 1 whole group is 13, when you've got 4 groups of 13 with 1 left over. So 13 and 1 left over is our answer. We then move on to being able to use that pictorially, and again, divide by 4. The 4 rows really help to see that that's the sharing pattern they're using. So our 10 sticks here, share them out. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, I have one that I can't use, so I swap that for my ones. I then have 13, so I bring down my other 3, and then I can swap them into 1, 2, 3, 4, and again we build that pattern so that the children can see. And there's 1 left over. Can't have 1 left over, we call that the remainder, and that's where we get to in year 3.